She said it really hard.
Shelley Blank.
No, I'm all right. No, I'm.
He's gone last year in high school.
Rolling presidential meetings. I was in Johnstown.
He used to live next to Marshall in his apartment.
Even right through, I saw the thing that I was looking over at the center door of the school. You know, over where that wing comes over to the church, right there. Yeah, there's one above the other.
What they are?
Enmity means division, hatred, right? Enmity.
Division. Whole lifestyle is not violence.
Right, for sure.
Yeah. I can have a hard time pronouncing this.
Yeah. It is hard.
Yeah.
So is this where we're starting today? Where are we?
Oh.
I know you told us where we were to start today, but I can't remember
He always,
actually.
oh, this is, Wednesday Bible class, he always, first carols, right down where we're finished.
How many people come to Wednesday morning?
Good morning. I love it.
Oh, that's great.
Begin with a word of prayer. Let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, your Son Jesus triumphed over the prince of demons and freed us from bondage to sin. Help us to stand firm against every assault of Satan and enable us always to do your will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. All right. So last week we left off with Judas Maccabeus defeating Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, and giving, after they had been required to not carry out various Jewish practices, and Antiochus IV had put in sacrificed swine in the temple and a statue of Zeus, and all these things. So we're in the Judeans under the Maccabees, kind of the second page of that. The second page of Judas, the Judeans under the Maccabees. Does anybody remember what Maccabeus translates to? The hammer. That's right. So it was Judas Maccabeus, the Maccabees, the hammer. And So they were able to defeat and take Jerusalem and rededicate the temple. And I was wondering about ways, what would be their templates for purifying the temple and rededicating that. And then on Wednesday, we're looking at the book of Leviticus, and we had the instructions for the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, that we were looking at in Leviticus. And big part of the Day of Atonement is the high priest first makes atonement for himself, and then he goes in and makes atonement for the holy place, for the tent of meeting, and for the altar. And there's sort of these rites for purifying those items as well from all the uncleannesses of just being in the midst of unclean people, being in the midst of sinners. That the tabernacle, and so translating forward to the temple and the altar of sacrifice and the high place, holy place, and most holy place. My guess is that would sort of be their template for how did they rededicate or purify the temple from those uncleannesses. Well, the same way they did it every year, even though it wasn't exactly on that year, on the day of Yom Kippur, but it was that how do we cleanse the temple? This is how we cleanse the temple. So that was sort of my guess from what we read there. So, Judas was able to get freedom for Jerusalem and the Jews in Judea, and began moving outward from there to try to liberate the people of Galilee and Gilead, which is a little bit some of the outer regions there. Gilead, as in there is a balm in Gilead, just those outer areas. And he had two brothers, Simon and Jonathan, were also part of his military force there as well. When Antiochus was killed, one of his generals, Lysias, was sort of taken over, took over that work, and began to fight back against Judas. And one of the Maccabee brothers was killed in that, and they did grant a treaty finally, granting the Jews the right to live according to their own laws, to worship Yahweh in keeping with the precepts laid down in the Torah. Judas received a full pardon, though politically Judas and his compatriots remained under Syrian rule. And it was also about this time that this new emperor deposed the high priest and put a Greek sympathizer in as the high priest, and this comes up as problematic later on. So in the Kisidim desert, Judas, when the new high priest came in, Judas lost the support of a sect that had been wanting to get religious freedom, and which they seem to have now, and so they withdrew their army and their support of Judas there, and so in a little bit after that, Judas sends a delegation to Rome to ask for help against the Syrians, because they were still looking for political freedom as well as the religious freedoms. There's a little quote there from the first Maccabees chapter 8. Judas had heard the fame of the Romans, that they were very strong and well disposed toward all who made an alliance with them, and they pledged friendship to those who came to them. Men told him of their wars and their brave deeds among the Gauls, how they had defeated them and forced them to pay tribute. So wanting to connect with the Romans and making some help there, they made a treaty with the Romans. Basically to say if there was, if they had an offensive or defensive need, they would be there to help one another. And this gave Rome the opportunity to begin to spread into Syria and the Near East, which, if you're a conquering empire, that's a place you want to go, because if you head that direction from Turkey around through Israel, then you've got land routes into Egypt and into Africa, not just the water routes as well. In 161 BC, sort of the final battle between Judas and one of the Syrian generals, Nicanor, and Judas was killed, and really became quite chaotic after his death. So you had the Hellenists who were sympathetic to the Greek nature of things under Syrian rule, and then you had the Sidonians who were looking for religious freedom, and then you had the Maccabees who wanted all the freedom. And when Judas died, the Hellenists reasserted themselves, and because the high priest was sympathetic to them, they began taking authority there. So Alchemists placed Hellenists, those who were the Greek-loving culture, into positions, tore down the partition of the temple that separated. There was the court of the Jews and the court of the Gentiles. I mean, even the Gentile converts had to stay in one area versus where the Jews could go, and they separated that, and things really began falling apart within that area. The three surviving Maccabee brothers were driven out of the land, and they fled to out beyond the Dead Sea. And Jonathan, the younger brother, was elected to sort of take his place. So we had Jonathan and Simon now as the last two Maccabee brothers to fight. Jonathan continued with sort of the guerrilla warfare, taking them on bit by bit, and there was a revolution within Syria that helped Jonathan achieve his goal of getting control of Jerusalem. There was one claim for the Syrian throne and another claim. So we had Demetrius I and Alexander Ballas claiming to be the rightful heir, and so there was that fight occupied them, and so they could pay more attention to Jerusalem. And Jonathan and the Maccabees could gain Jerusalem at that point, and both Demetrius and Ballas offered Jonathan privileges for military support, so he was kind of like, they had a strong army, so they wanted one of them to support them in their claims for the throne of Syria, and he didn't trust Demetrius, so he accepted the offer of Alexander Ballas, and Demetrius was killed and defeated, and as a reward for his support, Jonathan Maccabeus was appointed as the high priest and made him one of the king's friends and sent him a purple robe and a golden crown, sort of giving him this role of being both king and priest. Kind of in the bottom right page under Jonathan the Cunning. So in 153 BC, Jonathan officiated at the high priest at the Feast of Booths, and which was fine. He was of priestly descent, so it was a legal thing, and was sort of united with that religious party that wanted religious freedom. And Jonathan kind of combined priest and king together into one in that. Alexander wasn't a king very long. He was hated by the people, and Ballas came, and he, interestingly, he had Alexander Ballas didn't remain king very long, but he had married to make a alliance, had married Cleopatra, daughter of Ptolemy VI in Egypt, to try to get the Egyptian throne, and but Ptolemy defeated him, and he was killed there. So then Demetrius II, the other Demetrius' son, assumed the role over the Syrian Empire. He took the throne at that point from his father's enemy. So got a new Syrian ruler. He connects with Jonathan and sort of arranged for Demetrius II to take the throne, and he was able to maintain those privileges for Jerusalem and for Jonathan in Jerusalem. So sort of a diplomatic solution that time, and was able to expand the territory under their control. And so he made good deals, so they call him the cunning brother. But trouble in Syria ended in death for Jonathan. There was an officer of the Syrian army was a roadblock to his success, and so he killed Jonathan's bodyguard and had Jonathan assassinated. The other brother, Simon, comes in at this point. So now we're on Simon. Simon succeeds Jonathan. And kind of in the second paragraph down there, one of Simon's great accomplishments was he kind of brought together the three parties of the Jews there, the Hellenists, the Chassidims, and the Maccabees. And he was able to sort of unite them under, finally, instead of squabbling with one another, he was able to bring them together. And because he was able to bring them together, and the Jewish people conferred upon Simon the position of absolute sovereign and made him ruler of the nation, hereditary with his family. So he became kind of the first king with sort of descending rights of descendants to take over the kingdom after him. And then he wanted to continue to expand the war-torn territory. So he made safe the roads from Joppa to Jerusalem and setting up various outer defenses for those things. And in Maccabees 14, it says, "The land had rest all the days of Simon. He sought the good of his nation. His rule was pleasing to them, and as was the honor shown him all his days. And he took Joppa for a harbor and opened a way to the isles of the sea. He extended the borders of his nation and gained full control of the country. He gathered a host of captives. He ruled over Gezerah and Beth Zur and the citadel, and removed its uncleannesses from it, and there was none to oppose him." So they had good rule under Simon. Simon made a treaty with Rome that gave security and prestige to the Jews against their enemies. And the Roman Senate even sent official letters to the various kings around them, telling them that they were aligned with the Jews and not to make war against them. And Simon was even able to coin his own money, which as a Roman subject was a pretty big deal, and or at least a Roman partner. They weren't under their rule really at this point. They were independent. You were sovereign if you could print your own money. There was one dark spot on his record, was the treatment given to apostate Jews. If they had renounced their Judaism or sided with their enemies, Simon either deported or executed them. So that was a harsh punishment for the Jews who had abandoned the faith. Sorcerers were hanged and pagans exiled. And the successful activities of Simon fostered the fires of nationalism. So everybody was proud to be Jewish. They had a Jewish state. They had Jewish practices going on, and they had safety, and they had their own identity in that time. So as the people in Jesus' time were looking at, what could we get back to? What would be ideal? I mean, the days under Simon would have been fantastic. They would have liked to be back to Simon's independence and his rule and peace and these things. But he didn't live very long. His own son-in-law killed him and his two of his sons, and so he was assassinated and murdered, and so he was the last of that first generation of the Maccabees, the sons of Mattathias. And they all kind of died pretty violent ends. So
Who do you trust?
yeah, yep. So let's see. 2 sons, Judas and Eleazar, died on the battlefield. 3 others were assassinated, and they were buried at an impressive monument. I don't know if that was still there at the time of Jesus or not. So the whole Maccabean thing was about 30 years, about a 30-year stretch, and some good things had come of it. So Ptolemy, who had murdered Simon and his sons, wanted to take control of things, wanted to kill all of the descendants, but John, Hyrcanus, had escaped. What are we under here? Under the Hasmoneans. Now we're in the section under the Hasmoneans. And this is what's going to lead us into the Roman occupation of things. So when Simon died, the Syrians saw an opportunity to get Jerusalem back, and so they couldn't fight against him. So Hyrcanus had to surrender to the Syrian king, and so the political liberty was lost. They were back under subject to the Syrians again, and there was again division among the various parties of the Jews. Hyrcanus didn't treat the Chassidims well. He didn't appreciate the role they had played as the supporters of the Maccabees, and at the death of Simon, there was this antagonistic attitude over them, and there were kind of this, and it's from this point where you get the three main sects of Judaism developing there. You get the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. Were just sort of 3 different, we'll call them denominations, sort of Judaism. They had different roles and responsibilities. The Sadducees were taking control of the temple. The Pharisees were like the synagogues and the preaching and teaching. And the Essenes were kind of wanting to live out in the desert and leave us alone and kind of be these sort of very stark, sort of like almost like John the Baptist, live out in the wilderness on the bare necessities kind of people. Yeah, locusts and honey and stuff. So, Astrobulus the first, Judah succeeded his father, and he was not a good king. And then there were various descendants into this. He had clashes with the Pharisees. Move on to skip over this part. Hyrcanus II became high priest during the reign of Alexandra, and he again was weak but didn't rule very long. And there was this final conflict between Astrobulus II and Antipater, the governor of an area around there. And this governor, Antipater, was the father of who would become Herod the Great. And so, because Antipater was afraid that Astrobulus would deprive him of his position, they had a treaty, but they were there was conflict between them and a civil war between their parties, and they appealed to Rome to adjudicate this conflict. And they're like, okay, Rome likes to adjudicate things. Let's see, you want to decide whether you're going to be king or you're going to be king? I'll tell you what, we'll be king. and we'll let you guys kind of just do what we let you do. The Romans were glad to come to Judea and arbitrate and remain there permanently. Like, yeah, we can, and we'll come, we'll arbitrate, and we'll make sure we keep the peace. We'll keep an army here to make sure that you stay peaceful. Yeah, and if you want us here to have an army here, that's going to cost us money. So if you want us here to keep the peace, and we're going to tax you to keep us here to keep the peace, but we'll put a governor in charge here. He'll take care of the various disputes and things. He'll be Caesar in this place for you, and but you'll still have your own ruler. You know, Herod. You know, he can sort of be the local governor kind of thing. But that was, you know, that was how Rome kind of did their thing. It's like, yeah, we'll come and help. With help like this, you know.
Didn't Stalin say the same thing in Czechoslovakia and Poland and a whole bunch of other countries?
Yeah. Yep. This is what they did with everything. They tried to negotiate all these things, but again, they just kept, you know, there was a revolt, and they're just fighting back and forth with everything there.
So they originally aligned with Rome for prestige and
Yeah, under like Simon, the Maccabean, they had their own independence. Rome said, yeah, you're a good ally for us. Sounds good. We'll even tell Egypt and everybody around you, don't make war, because you pick on them, you're picking on us, and that all sounded good. But then there was, Syria again took over, and there were these fights, and Rome didn't seem to back them up like they thought they were going to. And
careful who you align yourself with. Huh?
that's right. Yeah. So in 63 BC is when the Romans really take over. And remain there until about 135. So, Roman period begins in 63 BC. Hadrian, as he built a wall up in England, was the ruler of Rome at that time. And as long as the Jews were obedient and submissive to the laws of Rome, they were treated well. Judaism was recognized as one of the licensed religions in the Roman world, so they could be Jewish, and that was fine. They had to pay tribute. The Jews resented this because they wanted to, who wouldn't resent it? They were able to have a judicial and legislative body that we know as the Sanhedrin. They were able to settle civil disputes and minor disputes. But what was one thing that the Sanhedrin or the Jews could not do with a criminal?
Crucify him.
They couldn't put him to death. Rome reserved the right to put anybody to death for themselves. So pretty fair treatment, but there was one group of extremists known as the Zealots. They wanted to keep breaking out of, they wanted to overthrow Rome and push them out. So now you've got Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots. And there was one of them that we know from one of the disciples, Simon the Zealot. There was sort of that, that was sort of his background. Not Simon Peter, but different Simon. But Simon the Zealot was one of them, and so they did have a background with those. And so you can see that you've got Rome in charge. You've got these zealots creating unrest and having revolutions. There were a number of them, and so when Jesus appears on the scene and they're able to sort of say he's causing a rebellion, he's saying don't pay taxes, you can see why Rome would be interested in putting down that kind of a rebellion, why that was a good approach for the Sadducees and the Pharisees to take for accusing Jesus to get Rome turned against him, is to say, well, he's another one of these rebels, these insurrectionists. And even at Jesus' trial, when he's put up against Barabbas was a robber, and he had committed murder in the insurrection. There were times of uprising and things that Barabbas had participated in, and he was guilty of murder during that time. So this is in the early 30s AD, so about 90 years after this is all happening.
So the zealots, you could say, had like a premonition of where this thing was leading to Rome. And so they're protesting because they can see down the road
Yeah.
what's going to happen because they're going to be ruled over.
Yeah, so by 63 BC, Rome is really pretty well in charge. They're in charge of things, and that's when the zealots are like, no, we want to be back on our own. We want to have our own independence, not whatever you're going to grant to us, but we want full independence as well. So meanwhile, back in Rome, there's lots of trouble in Rome. 53 BC to 43 BC, you had Caesar and Pompey. They became estranged. There was a civil war within Rome, and Aristobulus II was poisoned on his way to Judea with Roman help. 44 BC, in March, Roman senators murdered Caesar, and this a war ensued between Brutus and Cassius, and Mark Antony and Octavian on the other side. I mean, this is your classic, Roman history kind of stuff. This is all happening about 40 years before Jesus was born. So you kind of got these parallel histories going on. You think it's like, wow, that's pretty. Julius Caesar, that's pretty close to within 40 years of the birth of Jesus. That's pretty amazing when you look at that. There are, 5 smaller sections of Roman rule under Judea. Over Judea, you've got the Idumean dynasty, the first procurators, Agrippa I, later rulers, and then the Jewish revolt toward 70. Jesus is born during that first dynasty, and that's when Herod the Great is in charge, when you've got you have Herod the Great in charge. He's this insane, power-hungry maniac who kills his own children and is just worried about everything because they thought he was going to be overthrown by them, and just a crazy, Herod the Great gave his Jews a strong and efficient government. He had inherited loyalty to Rome no matter who was in power there. He was strong, he was fine to be loyal to Rome, and so Rome was happy to support him as well. And under Mark Antony. And then in 31 BC, Herod shifted his loyalty to Augustus Caesar, Octavian. And then Herod began a thorough program to eliminate his opponents. He killed the Sanhedrin. He accidentally drowned Aristobulus, the Roman procurator there. These older co-rulers were also being killed. He killed his wife, and he was just bloodthirsty, just awful stuff, paranoid.
Wasn't a whole lot of trust in each other.
Right. So he was avoiding unnecessary wars, so he was able to rebuild many buildings, and including in 20 BC, he began to reconstruct the temple because Zerubbabel's temple was shabby in comparison with the surrounding new buildings. He was building all these great buildings, and Zerubbabel's temple was still, was not of as grandeur, so he began rebuilding that and expanding it. And he just was willing to exterminate anybody who was contrary to him. He had lots of wives and children, but a lot of jealousy and rivalry. Here's an example. Marimene, it was one of his relatives, it was sort of his favorite wife. He loved her greatly, favored her sons. Herod's mother-in-law, Kypros, and his sister Salome, representing the Idumeans, resented and plotted against them, and he put them in, even his favorite wife, he ended up putting her to death because he thought she had betrayed him. Finally, Herod became afflicted with an incurable disease based on his madness and these sorts of things. Many, it's sort of the typical thing. Did he get syphilis or something like that that caused some sort of insanity? Probably, The people hated him, and so this is what resulted in his insanity. Was like, you heard about this one born king of the Jews in Bethlehem. And he wanted to go, he wanted to make sure that this one born king of the Jews wasn't going to threaten him for his place as king of the Jews, so he had thought. So he had all the babies in Bethlehem murdered at the birth of Jesus.
That last sentence of that top paragraph there.
3 of his sons were executed.
Better than-
Better to be Herod's swine than his children. Yeah, he took better care of his pigs than he did of his.
If you
Yeah.
were the people, and he had all the kids married from 2 years back, I mean,
Yeah.
you had to have everybody against you.
Yeah, and so he was Jewish, but he was marrying in. His dad had married in with Gentiles and things, so he was sort of this half breed. And then his kids, so you got Herod at Jesus' trial and things. This is going to be one of his sons. So he's not a pure Jew either. He's a half breed, and so the people don't like him either. They're sort of tolerating him. So that's why you've got sort of Herod on the one hand, and you've got Pontius Pilate on the other hand, as sort of these two rulers at that time. It's interesting. So the people loathed Herod with an undying hatred. To ensure mourning upon his death, he gave orders that his troops were to incarcerate the principal men of the nation in the Hippodrome, in a big stadium. At the moment of his death, his troops were to execute them. To make sure that there was weeping and wailing at the moment of his death, he put all these people to death.
Now, if that isn't a sick person.
He's just totally sick and crazy. Fortunately, this order was countermanded. They didn't do that. It's like, look, he's dead. We're not going to do this. Yeah,
Well, they're smarter than the average person.
yeah. He died in 1 BC, which, so we have a record of his death in Roman records, and so by having him dying in 1 BC, we know that he died shortly after Jesus' birth, because he was alive enough to kill the babies in Bethlehem, but they fled to Egypt, and then the angel appears to Joseph later on and says, "The man, those who seek the child's life are dead. You can come back now." So we know they came back into Galilee and up into Nazareth eventually, sometime after 1 BC, meaning Jesus was probably born 3 BC, 1 BC, something like that. And that's just based on, we have this chronological line of years that we're trying to assign markers to. I mean, the line of years is fixed. I mean, there's a certain number of years between this day and this date, whether we call it 1 BC or 1 AD or 2 BC or whatever it is. And as you try to count these things backwards more accurately, when you set up the BC and AD thing, you start counting back and you're like, well, actually there was more time in between there than we thought. So he didn't actually get born at 1 AD. He got born during, maybe 3 BC. Maybe it was 4 years earlier than we thought, based on when Herod died and some of these other things. So,
Proof of man's inadequacy compared to God.
yeah, that's right. I mean, we can try to assign dates to things as best we can, but there's always going to be better information at later times. And so it's still good. It's still decent shorthand to sort of say, okay, the year of our Lord is 1 AD. It's shorthand enough, and he was 33 years old when he died. So, about 33 AD is when he died. So, I mean, that's still good enough shorthand when we're looking at a 2,000-year span that, yeah, about 2,000 years ago it was this. It's good enough. If you want to get much more precise, then it was a few years BC is when he was likely born. And remember, there's no year 0 either. There's no year 0. You're either either 1 BC or 180. So, yeah.
Well, the most important part is knowing that it happened and believing it.
Well, and that's why, like under Luke's description of the birth of Jesus, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed, and so that it grounds it into an historical reality. This was the first census that taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and while Philip was tetrarch of Abilene, and he gives those very specific things, which can be cross-listed with Roman records. It's like, okay, this isn't once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away. It was when George was president of America, in the United States, and this guy was king of England, and this guy was king of France. It's like, okay, there's a specific timeline for those things to be the case.
They didn't have to go every year and pay taxes, right? They just-
Well, so that specific census was unique. It was like a resetting of, all right, I want to get a better handle on how many people I have here so I can make sure I'm not getting, because I'm guessing the population has increased, so I want to make sure I'm getting all my taxes. So that's why he ordered a census to tax everybody, to make sure he had the right count for everything. Yeah.
But I mean, that's definitely in the story, so
Yes.
you can pinpoint that pretty close.
Yep, absolutely. So we have in the back of your packet here, you've got a diagram of Herod's temple that he began building in 20 BC. It's on the very back of this. His temple was 15 stories tall, as opposed to Zerubbabel's, which was 3 stories tall or 4 stories tall at the most. So much larger, much grander in scale, more ornate in those things. In 70 AD, the Romans finally had enough of the Jews rebelling, and they destroyed Jerusalem completely, and that's what you end up with, the destruction of Herod's temple. And this is the temple that Jesus was present in, that, walking through the temple courts, and the disciples are like, oh, look at these beautiful stones, look how big these are are gorgeous. And Jesus says, a day will come when not one stone will be left upon another, predicting 70 AD that these would in fact be destroyed. All that's left of the Temple Mount, or the temple itself, is some foundation stones that you can see. And we talked about this on Wednesday a little bit too. I'm making sure I'm not repeating myself in the same class. We did talk about this on Wednesday. The western wall, or what's known as the Wailing Wall, is the foundation stones of basically Herod and Zerubbabel's temple that they still can, that's accessible from outside of the Palestinian-controlled area of the Dome of the Rock Mosque. The Jews have access to it, where they can get to that area and touch the foundation stones of the temple, which is why that's so significant to them. It's the closest they can get to any part of the temple that's sort of left.
How do those two temples compare to Solomon's?
I think Herod's is bigger than Solomon's. I don't know that for sure, though. I know once he gets the whole complex built, as Herod's building the whole complex, the whole thing is bigger. But yeah, I don't have a comparison of the two there. I think Herod's is even bigger than the footprint of Solomon's temple too.
Much as they hated him, I'm surprised it took him 70 years to. They just thought that after he died, let's get rid of this thing right away.
The Romans, you mean? Well,
Or the Jews.
no, they were okay with. I mean, they hated him, but they liked his reforms, and they liked what he was doing for the city, and I mean, they were paying for it. If you see there was a movie made. It's probably 15 years ago now. The Nativity Story. It's it's Mary and Joseph and the birth of Jesus and kind of telling their story. They sort of do they have sort of a side plot where they focus on Herod, and they do a really nice job of laying out his sort of insanity and his extravagance and sort of people's fear of him and what he's building and, you know, his building projects and stuff. They do a nice job of depicting that about, you know, it's like, oh, I'm going to make this beautiful. We're going to have like a waterfall with all these things. And they're kind of, all those people are like, how are we going to pay for this exactly? And he's like, that's what taxing the people is for. Get on with it. It's like, okay. You can see his kids, you know, come and talk to him, and they're all very afraid of him, and it's pretty wild. So the nativity story is maybe about 15 years ago now. I think it's a really beautiful account of, or depiction of Mary and Joseph and the family life and stuff like that. So worth checking out. So, all right. So next week we'll look at a few of the actual stories out of the book of the Maccabees, and we'll spend a couple weeks on that, and that'll probably wrap that up then. We've got a good sense of a lot of political intrigue that moved us from Syrian, you know, from Persian rule through Alexander the Great, and then all these other wars between his kids and his descendants and generals and things, and a lot of intrigue there. And we end up with the Romans there because two rulers of Syria couldn't decide who would be in charge, so they asked Rome to come and sort it out for them, and they said, yeah, we'll sort it out and stay. And so they did. And that's kind of how that's how you get the Greek language as being the widely used language in that area, and Roman rule. So you get those two aspects of Jesus' cultural life. All right, we'll see you. Pick you